Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I hope you've all been well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favourite Gothic literature texts. These are my 5 favourites, the ones that I love the very most and the ones that are my go-to when I want to recommend Gothic books to other people. So a little bit of background if you're unfamiliar with the Gothic genre. Gothic is basically the literary movement that came after Romanticism. The literary movement is said to have been started by the novel The Castle of Otranto, which I've always mentally read as The Castle of Ontario, so that's funny, but this book was written by Horace Walpole, I think it was? Yeah, Horace Walpole in 1764 in England, so this is widely considered to be the start of basically where Gothic literature originated. A lot of people tend to think that Gothic is synonymous with horror, which it's not. Gothic more uses terror as opposed to horror. So horror is like when you have like a gory scene where someone gets hurt, or if something's uncomfortable to watch because you can see everything and it's really scary and it's horrible, but well, horrible. Terror is generally when something creepy and scary happens but you can't see it. It's more like the fear of waiting for something to happen, like if something goes bump in the night but you don't know what it is, or if you have a mysterious person with a past who's coming back to haunt them. If you think they did something and it's like scary and creepy, that's more what terror is. Terror is the unseen, and if you don't really understand what's going on. So in Gothic literature books, they tend to be really creepy because like the monsters are constantly in the background. The characters are running through a creepy dark castle with lots of like really moody, gloomy hallways and stuff. But it's not guaranteed that there's something horrible there. Like, it's not guaranteed there's something scary, but you think there might be because you can't see it. So horror is more like gore and like cheap scares and like slasher films and stuff like that, but terror is what tends to be in Gothic. So Gothic tends to have the aesthetic of like creepy dark hallways and old castles, forests, governesses who are possessed by ghosts, vampires, all of this kind of stuff. It's not necessarily like overtly scary, but it's just like more of a creepy undertone. So I really love Gothic literature. Because Gothic literature also came out of the Romantic period, the writing is often very beautiful. And I mean, there are still Gothic lit books that are being written today. It's not that the period ended, but the like high time of Gothic lit was basically after the Castle of Castle of Otranto. So basically after the Castle of Otranto, that was where it started. So a lot of the really popular Gothic lit books were published between like the early 1800s and the end of that century. So yeah, that's basically the Gothic genre, a really quick intro to it. I did study Gothic lit at university. As I said, I had a lot of fun, I really liked it. So without further ado, let's jump into the video and I will show you my 5 favourite Gothic literature books. Number 1 is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm sure no one is surprised. I have made no secret about how much I adore this book. I really love Frankenstein. The first time I read it, it was second year of uni. Third year? I think second year of uni when I did this Gothic lit course. I thought it was going to be scary and cringy and not great, but as it turns out, it was actually a really brilliant read. I also actually have a video up on this channel where I speak about Frankenstein and I analyze it and dissect it and do all of that stuff. So if you would like to see more about that book, you can go and watch that video if you would like. But basically, Frankenstein is about a man named Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Just a very subtle hint. The monster isn't Frankenstein. So many people call the monster Frankenstein and it's been a huge pet peeve of mine for ages. But yeah, the doctor's name is Victor Frankenstein. The monster doesn't have a name, he gets called like demon. So yeah, it's about this man who makes a creature by sneaking into graves and stealing bones and various body parts. Essentially, from nothing he creates a monster and then he immediately regrets it and everything goes on from there. It's a really good book. I so recommend you reading it. The prose in this book are beautiful. Like, there's this one section in the novel where the monster wakes up after like running out of the laboratory. He sees birds and he sees like a babbling stream, and there's so much beautiful nature imagery in this book and I love it so much. So I definitely recommend you read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Number 2, The Magic Toy Shop by Angela Carter. Now, this isn't just one of my favorite Gothic lit books, this is basically like my second favorite or favorite book of all time. I adore this book. I only brought 2 books to Japan with me, like 2 physical novels. The first one was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, my original copy from when I was like 5 years old. And the second one was this one. I love this book so much. Angela Carter is like one of my favorite people to have ever existed. She's so cool. She did like a writing residency at my university in the 60s or the 70s or something like that. She's from the UK, and she also like taught English in Japan like back in that time, and she's just the coolest person and I love her so much. This book is about a young girl named Melanie whose parents die very, very suddenly. She has to basically uproot and end her childhood and go with her siblings to this really creepy house in London where she's going to now live with her uncle, his wife, and his wife's siblings. So basically, when the death of her parents come, it's like her childhood is ripped away from her, and it kind of follows how she deals with living in this creepy toy shop in London, where she had this really beautiful bucolic life beforehand in the countryside of England. But yeah, a more recent Gothic lit book. This is really brilliant. I love this one and I so recommend you guys check it out. Number 3 is A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. Now, this isn't a traditional Gothic literature text. Obviously, this is a kids' book series, but it has a very Gothic aesthetic. It has a Gothic undertone throughout the stories, and it's one of my favorite book series ever, so I'm putting it in this list anyway. I read the Series of Unfortunate Events books when I was like 12 or 11, something like that. I remember borrowing them from my primary school library, just one after the other, because I never owned the books myself. There were 13 of them, so they were super expensive. But I just remember reading these books at a really young age and loving them to pieces. I feel like I don't need to explain the plot of this one, but if you're unfamiliar with it, basically A Series of Unfortunate Events is about the unfortunate lives of the 3 Baudelaire children. Essentially, their parents perish in a terrible fire that comes out of nowhere, and the 3 orphans get shipped to relative after relative after relative in a really irresponsible way. All the while he's like a 3rd cousin twice removed or something. I can't remember the description that was in the book. A distant relative, Count Olaf, is like chasing after them, trying to take their fortune. There's a lot of really, really wonderful like literary references throughout the series. For example, I think in the reptile room, one of the snakes was called the Virginian wolf snake. I have been watching the Netflix series that came out. I watched the first season and really, really loved it. I started watching the 2nd season and I stopped watching it like halfway through. The reason is there's an awesome subplot in A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is like one of the reasons it's like one of my favorite books. It's really, really cool. The original like movie that came out in the early 2000s that had Jim Carrey in it, that didn't touch the subplot at all. But this Netflix series, I think they're making it way too overt. They've invented all of these characters who aren't supposed to be there. So basically, I'm waiting for Tyler to go and read the books. He's read up to the 3rd one, I think. Haven't you? 5th one. 7th.
No, 7th.
Never mind. Tyler's read up to the 7th book. So I want him to be able to read it and experience that before we finish the series. And it's just, yeah, brilliant book series. I couldn't recommend it enough. Number 4 is A Picture of Dorian Gray. I only read this recently. I think it was the first book I finished this year, and it was just so brilliant. Like, the imagery in this book is beautiful. At the very beginning of the story, there's this scene where they're in a garden and it's just like describing the way the garden looks, and it was just so enchanting to read. I loved it. This is a very, very famous Gothic lit book. There's always heaps of references to Dorian Gray everywhere. Basically, the plot is there's this beautiful young man named Dorian, and he's very much in love with himself, and he's in love with how innocent and pretty he is. And his friend, Basil, paints a picture of him. Basil's obviously an artist. Once he sees this picture painted of him, he realizes how lovely he looks in the picture, and then he gets really ticked off because he realizes that he will never be as beautiful as he was the day this painting was painted. From this point on, he will just get older and older and more haggard and more ugly and all of this stuff, and the painting will always stay perfect and beautiful and lovely. By some strange twist of fate, like God hears him or something like that, basically Dorian stops aging. The painting instead starts aging for him. Essentially, he will go like the rest of his life with never ever ever aging, while the painting gets uglier and uglier and more haggard and all of this stuff. So basically he can live forever being youthful and pretty and 20, I think he was in his 20s when the painting was painted. There's a lot of really witty dialogue in this book as well, and I just like love the way it was written. It had a lot of really cool insights on the way that society worked and capitalism worked, and it like talked about politics. I thought it was really cool how the book just sort of like sucked you into like thinking that you were like a part of that time, and it was like very conversational, as if like you would get the political references and stuff, and it was just really, really brilliant. I love this book so much, and I so recommend you guys check it out. Number 5 is Jane Eyre. This is another classic that I only read recently. I can't believe it's taken me so long to read a Bronte sisters novel, but I have now read Jane Eyre and it was so wonderful. I didn't realize when I started reading it that it was a Gothic book, and surprisingly, I didn't know anything about the plot. I just knew it was about a girl named Jane Eyre. So I was really pleased that nothing was ruined for me. But yeah, Jane Eyre is about a young girl named Jane who is an orphan. I can't remember if her dad's alive. I'm pretty sure she's an orphan, which happens in like all of these stories. I'm just realizing she's an orphan and she has to go live with like horrible aunt or uncle. Her whole childhood she grows up pretty like badly abused, and then eventually she goes off to boarding school and she has a really hard life. Eventually she ends up being a young woman who is a governess to the ward of a mysterious man named Mr. Rochester. She moves into this great big beautiful manor in the English countryside, I think, and basically Mr. Rochester has like a mysterious past, and the house is like really creepy, and it just follows on from there, like her experiences of being a governess to this kid, and it's like brilliant. It's a brilliant story, and it's so beautifully written. And one of the things that struck me the most was the humor. The humor in the book is really good. Like, Jane is so sassy, especially when she's a child. There's a point where a reverend comes and tells her that like, oh, she's going to hell because she's not like well behaved enough, but in reality she's just like a kid who's being abused and trying to stand up for herself, and she sasses the reverend. It's like really great. Again, it's beautifully written. Some of the most beautiful prose I've ever read are in this book, and it's just like amazing. I think it's so good, and I so recommend you guys read Jane Eyre. Anyway, those are my 5 favorite Gothic lit books. Please let me know if you have any Gothic lit favorites. If you have any recommendations to give me, I would be super grateful because I absolutely love this genre. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a lovely day. Bye bye.